Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor presented by Preferred Expressions team. I am Sanjay. Inside this video session guys, we are going to understand about asynchronous JavaScript. And also guys, if you're a beginner to this channel, please don't forget to subscribe and keep watching our previous video sessions and previous playlists to get the clear concept about frameworks and WordPress tutorials. So inside this video, we are going to discuss about synchronous and asynchronous JavaScript. If I go to the next tab, here I have written some theoretical concept to understand about these concepts. So how basically JavaScript executes basically the processes. JavaScript is a single threaded programming language, which means that only one thing can happen at a time. This means that the JavaScript engine can only process one statement at a time in a single thread. This is known as synchronous JavaScript. How can we understand? Back to browser. If I open the console tab here, let's say inspect, go to console, and if I make some zoom here, so something like here. So let's say that console.log, let's say single, or let's say first process. Now this is our first statement. Now if I write again, let's say shift enter, something called console log, and let's say second process. If I again shift enter, let's say alert, this is something called third process. Again shift enter, let's say variable a equal to 10, and again let's say variable b equal to 10, and I am going to add these two values inside the third variable called c, let's say a plus b, and finally I am going to console all the values, so let's say c here. So here we have written some statements where console.log executes first. This is the second process executes. After that alert will be populated, and again these are the calculations will be happen and printed here. So if I again press enter here, as we can see that the third process is executing. It is because the first process executed, second process executed, and now third process is appearing as a populated message here alert. But remember, we haven't get the calculated result of this console.log c value. And this is because the calculated value of c is written after this alert value. So if I click on OK button, as we can see that after clicking alert button, here is the calculated result of c value. So go to slides. JavaScript is a single threaded programming language, which means only one thing can happen at a time. As we have seen about inside this console, that first process, second process, after that alert, clicking on the alert button and the console.log c is executed. It means that only single thing happen at a single time. That is, the JavaScript engine can only process one statement at a time in a single thread. This is known as synchronous JavaScript. So where is the issue in JavaScript then? Why actually we have implemented, or like we have studied about asynchronous JavaScript programming? Think about requesting huge amount of data from server via REST API or any call to the server, where top layer process will take time, then lower process are going to execute very late at system. So what basically these lines means? These lines means that suppose inside this console.log, let's say that first two statements are same. Inside the third statement, let's say that we have an Ajax call. Inside that Ajax call, actually we are requesting to server to save, or let's say to select all the data from our table, and let's say that it is selecting 10,000 records from the table. But 10,000 records, it means it will take some time to execute and take response from the server and send back to the client side. Now inside that third line, it will take time to execute the whole process of API call, and all the process of these lower lines, let's say after Ajax call, will have to wait about executing about the API calls. This is, however, somewhere time taking and the time consuming of the process. So how can we make the all process executing, and let's say that don't wait about the top layer's execution process. I want that the first two statements will be executed. If third process is going to take time, then automatically the next statements will be actually executing, and it also executing about the API calls. No process will wait about on dependency of any other top layer functions. So how can we implement these functionalities? While going through these issues, that's why actually asynchronous JavaScript comes into play, so that any top layer or low level process will not have to wait about the top layer functions to be executed. If API call or any other process will taking time, then it is executing simultaneously. So that's why asynchronous JavaScript comes into play. Now here, as we can see that using asynchronous JavaScript such as callbacks, promises and async await, we can perform long network requests without blocking the main thread. If I again go to console, let's clear out all these things, and let's say console.log, let's say first process, again shift enter, let's say console.log, let's say second process, again shift enter, let's say I'm going to set timeout here. This is where actually I'm executing a callback function here, and inside this set timeout, basically I want that this should be executed after 2 seconds, and inside that let's say console.log callback function. After this callback function, if I write again console.log, and let's say that third statement, and finally again for the fourth statement, let's say console.log, and this is all about fourth statement. Now if I press enter, what basically we are expecting about this whole process, we are expecting about synchronous JavaScript is that the first process will be executed, second process will execute, after that it will take some time to execute about this callback, and finally after executing the whole process of set timeout, it will print then third and the fourth statement. But remember, JavaScript is now updated about its asynchronous process. So if I press enter, as we can see that the first process is executed, second process, third process and the fourth is process. It means that the third and the fourth didn't wait about the executing about the set timeout callback function. After printing all these low time consuming functions, it has executed then about the set timeout callback function. So this is known as asynchronous JavaScript, where if this process will take some time, then these functions will not about, these functions simply will not wait until and unless this will be completed. Simultaneously all functions go and run the processor. If I again back to folder structure, let's understand about make an API call. So if I make a file something called say index.php, and if I open this file, and let's say that simply we are going to attach some of the jQuery files. So here is the CDN link of jQuery.main.js. You can find anywhere about this source. Now after including that, I'm going to make a button inside this file. So let's say button, and let's say that click to process Ajax. Now inside this button, I'm going to drop an ID for that. So let's say btn load data. So if I copy this ID, let's say that here is script tag, inside this script tag I'm going to write the jQuery syntax to actually execute the process. So this will be the syntax, and inside that I'm going to handle about the button click event of this btn load data. So this will be here, and something we have the selector ID, something called btn load data, and on click, let's on, we are going to bind this ID with the click event, and finally we are going to attach with the callback function. And inside here, let's say that we are going to make an Ajax call inside this block. So $Ajax, this is a jQuery method to complete our Ajax request. Inside this Ajax now, we have to pass some of the properties inside this object. So the first property should be something called URL. Now inside this URL, it means that we are going to make a request to the API call, and that API call should be a URL or something of file pointing. So let's say that we are going to make a file something called ajax.php in the current directory. So let's say inside this folder, I'm going to make a file something called ajax.php. Back to our slides, and let's say that inside that file I am going to send some of the data from this Ajax call. Let's say name equal to online web tutor, and something, let's say email, let's say abc@gmail.com, and finally we are attaching ID, and ID should be something called, let's say 10. Now this is the data we are sending with our Ajax call, and let's say we are going to supply about the method, and the method should be something called post method. And finally we are going to receive, let's say success. This should be a callback function to receive the response from the server. So it should be a single T here. Let's make some formatting, and this is here. So here is the response variable, and finally if I echo inside the success block, let's say console.log, and let's say response here. So if I save this file, again back to folder structure, open about called ajax.php, and simply inside this file if I receive all these parameters, let's say data equal to, let's say request, and we are requesting, let's say name here. So instead of data, let's say name, and we are receiving name inside this request variable. And also let's say here email, something with the same, let's say request again here, and this should be inside the key called email. And finally we are receiving called ID. So again if I copy this request, pasting it here, and here ID. Now let's say that echo JSON encode, and inside this I'm going to pass an array. Inside this array, let's say that ID. This is something called ID here. Let's say name, and finally we are attaching with this email address. So let's email, and this will be stored inside the variable something called email. So why basically we have made this? Actually we are going to send the JSON encoded data to our client side as a response. And finally let's die here. So if I go to index.php, let me check all the codes. We are going to click this button. After clicking that, we have binded a Ajax call inside this. Now let's say that console.log, let's say the single data, or let's say single process. Now inside this I'm going to bind, let's say console.log, let's say second process. After Ajax call, I am binding again a console here, console.log, and let's say that third process. Now if I save this file, if I run into the browser, actually what we are expecting from this synchronous JavaScript, In synchronous JavaScript, we are expecting that the first line should be printed. After that, it will execute this Ajax call and the second line will be printed then. And after completing this Ajax request, the third process we will get as the output screen. So if I save this file, go to browser and let's say that localhost. Inside this we have called JS folder. If I press enter, this is the button that we have made. So if I make some zoom here, clear console. Now I'm clicking on this button. After clicking on that, as we can see that the single process is executed. After that, actually it has taken some time to execute about the Ajax call, but the third process is not waiting about the completion of our second process. So third process automatically simultaneously started and executed. After that, it has taken the response from the server and printed as the second process. So this is known as asynchronous JavaScript. Now let's say that if I create a scenario and here let's say where id equal to let's say 5 value. Now we are getting a response object here and I want that after getting the response of this id from the server, I want that this id should be updated and console here. So if I comment this line and let's say that basically we are getting the JSON encoded data, so where data equal to $.parse JSON and let's say response. And finally I am going to assign inside this id variable as data.id. This is the data of JSON encoded data. Inside this data object, this is the id actually we have passed right here. So successfully we have fetched that and store inside this id variable. Now after third process, if I write something here, let's say that console.log and let's id value concatenate with this id variable. Now if I save this file, what we are expecting, as we have seen so far about asynchronous JavaScript, it means that the id will be assigned after executing about the third process and about this line. It means that here id value should be undefined. So if I save this file, let's see about the action in the browser. Click here this button. Now here as we can see that single process is executing, third process, id value and the second process. Now here as we can see that we have actually assigned id here but didn't work here. What actually we want that this should be id actually get assigned right here. So how can you make this asynchronous JavaScript call to synchronous value? Means we want that it will execute about the first single process, then it goes inside this block. Before going to this block, it will successfully execute this process. Now after executing, it takes value from the server assigned to this id and the next process will be executed. So for that, we need to make this Ajax call to a synchronous request. Why basically we need to make it as a synchronous? Because in the updated version of JavaScript, there are several things like as what we have seen about the callbacks, promises, async and the wait. These are the features where actually it has updated and upgraded about the JavaScript from synchronous to asynchronous JavaScript. So here we have to make called async equal to false. It means that we have told this Ajax request that it will execute about the process in a single thread process. So after writing async equal to false, now this whole process is going to execute as a single thread. So what basically we are going to get output. The first statement will be printed. After that, it will execute the whole process of this Ajax. It will get the value from the server and assign into this ID. After that, it will execute this statement called the second process. So the first process, second process, after that we have third process, and now ID value equal to 10, because it is getting from the server now. So if I save this whole code, go to browser, reload this page. Now if I click on this button, so let's click on this button. Now as we can see that the single process has been executed. But before executing about our Ajax call, which is basically asynchronous, here we have a warning inside this console tab, because we are going to actually deprecate the whole process. After that, the single process, the second process executed, which is inside this Ajax call. After that we have third process and then id value equal to tel. It means that we have converted about the asynchronous JavaScript inside the single threaded about the synchronous JavaScript, where the step-by-step process has been executed. But remember, we have to add an extra parameter inside this Ajax call. So inside this video session guys, actually we understood about the synchronous and the asynchronous JavaScript. So inside this video, if you have any doubt, then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching and have a great day.